One of the most well-known studies on closeness found something really important. When strangers spend about 45 minutes answering questions that gradually become more personal, they actually felt closer than people who stayed in small talk. But here's the part that most people miss. It wasn't just the questions that were asked. It was the gradualness. It was the reciprocity. It was the fact that both people moved deeper together. And this is where so many people misunderstand emotional intimacy. They think that closeness comes from going fast, but real intimacy is not about how deep you go. Contrary to popular opinion in this evolved community, it is about whether both nervous systems can stay safe as you go there together. Hey there, Evolver. If you have found this channel, you're probably someone who thinks deeply about life, growth, and the human mind. My name is Amelia, and this is a channel where we explore the psychology, neuroscience, and lived experience of what it actually means to evolve as a human being. In my work with individuals, couples, and leaders, I see this constantly. People want deeper connection. And now with screens and technology, the way things are, they want it more than ever. And I get that. They want more honesty, more availability, more vulnerability, authenticity, and meaningful conversations. You might even be one of those people, so you know what that feels like. But many people do not know how emotional intimacy actually builds. They either are staying on the surface or they're kind of jumping way too deep, way too quickly. And what ultimately ends up happening is that they overwhelm the other person's nervous system. And then they interpret the response that they get as a result of that overwhelm as some degree of rejection. Stay back. They don't want to go deeper. But sometimes it was not rejection. Sometimes the pacing was just simply off. In our last video at EVE, we talked about how to ask for what you need without turning that need specifically into interpersonal pressure. And this episode takes that one layer deeper, because emotional intimacy is not just about naming your needs and then leaving it there. It is learning how to reveal yourself in a way that creates safety, not pressure. And this is where the concept of reciprocal disclosure and attunement comes in. So let's define what the heck reciprocal disclosure is and why that's going to matter to you if you want deeper connection in your life. It basically means at the most simple level that I share something that's true for me. Like, I like plants and I'd rather plants than a bouquet of roses. And you share something that's true for you. Like, I really love when it rains. Then we notice what happens between us. There's not an interrogation. There's not emotional dumping on one another. There's no forcing that vulnerability that most of us crave. But what's happening in that moment is rhythmic. There's a back and forth to it. There's a shared movement down that ladder of what I call emotional safety. So I have 3 names that are written on my Remarkable right here. And I want to keep them in my line of sight. As I look at each one of them, I'm bringing them forward because their stories really do emulate a lot of these patterns that I see with working with individuals. So the first example, obviously I'm not going to name the individual, but let's use a pseudonym Drew. Let's just say Drew is the example that we're going to connect into. And this first example is, let's say Drew's going on an early date, and maybe you might be in Drew's seat right now. A surface level question that you might ask on that first date might be, what do you like to do outside of work? Or heck, even what do you do for work? A slightly deeper question might be, what feels really important to you in this season of your life? An even deeper question might be what has shaped you and how you approach relationships. And an even deeper question might even be what is something that you right now are still learning how to trust in yourself. Now, see the difference of depth. One is very much at the surface, and the other one is like, holy crap, why is Drew asking me this? And if you're Drew, you might just want to go down to the deeper roots of that person because heck, maybe you've been like my client as a conscious single, really trying to find your partner and you're in your mid-30s and you've kind of gotten so sick of that surface level connection, right? All of these that were asked could be beautiful connections, but they do not belong in the same moment. Here's why though. The skill is not just about knowing what question to ask in order to build a deeper emotional connection. The skill itself is in knowing what rung of the ladder the connection can hold. For example, if someone is giving you a shorter answer, they look away or they respond in a shorter way via text or let's say they laugh your question off, they change the subject, they deflect, or you notice in their body they're like tightening up. That may not mean that they're emotionally unavailable, although that might be a conclusion that righteously so you'd be jumping to. But it may just simply mean that the conversation and the question that you asked, it moved a little bit slower than their particular system could follow. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong. That doesn't mean that you asked the wrong question. Now let's go to example number 2 I have written down. And this client, their classic pattern is too deep, too fast pattern. It is one that I see for so many evolvers who they are so sick of that surface level connection and are craving intimacy. This also shows up though when people confuse intensity with intimacy, just like her. So what do you mean, Amelia, when you say that confusion point? Well, let's say, for example, like she did literally last week, and I had to kind of walk her through this. Someone shares something very personal very quickly. She just got a new job and she started looking out for who was that person that she could confide in and be her friend. But let's say, for example, someone shares something super personal very quickly. Maybe their trauma, maybe their fears, maybe their playlist that's a little aggressive, or maybe it's the deepest parts of the relationship history that they've had. You ever been in that position? But because of the conversation, it feels emotionally intense. It can also feel like what most people mistake for closeness. But here's the key thing in this. Intensity is not the same thing as intimacy. Intensity can, in fact, happen without safety. Intimacy, on the other hand, friends, requires safety. So you might be like, okay, Amelia, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Well, what I found is that a lot of people mistake the relief that they get of being seen for the reality of actually being known. And those two are totally different things, because being seen in one intense moment is not nearly the same thing as being known at your deepest, truest parts of yourself over time. Emotional intimacy, it requires pacing, consistency, responsiveness, and repair. And this is something that we aren't especially great at. The third example that I have here is Jane. Jane, she's the example of so many of us that have this constantly looping back up the ladder when long-term relationships are the most important. Now, because this matters in long-term relationships too, you might be at a moment like Jane was, where you're talking with your partner about something super vulnerable to you. Maybe it's a fear that you have about the relationship or about an insecurity. Maybe a disappointment that really bubbled up to the surface and, oh gosh, now it's time to express. And maybe that need in particular has been exceptionally hard for you in that long-term relationship to name. And you notice the conversation starts to get a little tense. Someone's tone changes. Someone's body tightens up. Someone starts defending or shutting totally down. And a lot of people think that the only way forward in a situation like this is to keep going deeper. Maybe lock in that moment, maybe stand in the doorway, make sure that no one leaves the room. But often the most emotionally mature move is to go back up that ladder. I have had to learn this. It has been brutal for my nervous system, but it's been one of the best skills that I have had to develop through the relationships that I deeply care about. Because you might say, hey, can we pause for a second? Or I want to stay connected while we talk about this. Or even something like, I've said this all the time with my partner. I think this matters and I do not want to lose each other in it. Or I don't want to miss a word that you're saying, is what I'll say to clients. And that's not avoiding depth in the moment. It is actually, in fact, protecting the conditions that make depth possible. So healthy intimacy does not always move downwards. Sometimes it moves upwards, then downwards, and then up and down again. That is what I call bobbing on the ladder. So the emotional safety ladder is something that we all need to wrap our heads around. Again, I shared this in episode EVE6 and 7. And I said I was going to circle back around to this, and here we are. The way that I think about this is through the emotional safety ladder. At the very top, you have those surface level preferences, food, hobbies, music, right? The easy part of getting to know someone. Then you move down a rung into values. This is what matters. What someone believes in, themselves, others, in the world, what they are oriented around, their paradigm, in other words. Then you move down a ladder to experiences. This is what shaped them, what they have lived and gone through, and what they have learned through that living. Down another rung, the emotions, what they feel, what comes up, what happens internally inside of them. Down another rung is the core vulnerabilities, our hopes, our fears, the insecure, tender places that we don't want to go near, the things that people do not reveal to everyone. And that is on purpose. And at the deepest level, you get into an identity, core aspects of who someone is, where the shame, the legacy, the mortality contemplations, the trauma, the true self, all of that is at the bottom. But the goal is not to rush to the bottom, although a lot of us want to, because that would just save us a lot of time, right? A lot of pain. Getting through that, reciprocal disclosure challenge. The goal is to move instead in a way that both people can stay present. Trust me, I know that that's hard, especially when none of us have been taught how to stay present. But here's the thing. Now, body language, that is where you can tell where someone is on the ladder through their body. You can notice the signals, the tells, the signs. If they are expanding, they may slow down, soften, even give in more detail, or become reflective. That is usually the green light for all of us to stay or gently deepen. If they are contracting, though, they may be giving you shorter answers, laugh it up, deflect, look away, tense their jaw, maybe even change the subject. Ever been there? This is usually a yellow light. So this is where we slow down, do not push. That's essentially what that's saying. Because if they disconnect, what happens? They're going flat. They're going to go blank. They might go super intellectual or seem suddenly far away, out of touch. And that, my friends, is usually a red light. Move back up the ladder. Not because they failed, but because their system is protecting them. So this is why I don't think that emotional intimacy is just about asking better questions. Trust me, that would be a lot easier if I were to just give you that and say, go ahead and ask better questions. But the truth of the matter is, if you truly want emotional intimacy, and let's be real, a lot of us do. We want that connection with the people that we love and care about. We want to find and connect with our dream partner. We want to have a closer relationship with our colleagues, our friends, even our family members. And better questions help, absolutely. But without attunement, which is that when I step down or go down the ladder, you come with me and you notice it, right? The noticing is that attunement. Even a better and beautiful question can become pressure. And I had to learn this the hard way because that pressure, it creates this disconnect that you might not have words to, but your nervous system knows. And it sucks. Honestly, it really sucks when that happens. The real skill that we're talking about is knowing, where are we on the ladder right now? Is this, in fact, reciprocal? Is this paced and well paced at that? And lastly, can both of us, both people in any scenario, stay connected to themselves while we go deeper? That's the question that I want you asking. The next time that you are in a situation like any one of these, because disclosure without safety can create exposure. More often than not, it does. I'll never forget, we had a Evolve movie club where we had a movie club member share something that was very deep and it felt like personal disclosure to her. And that was the first time she had done so in a small, intimate room. And afterwards, she mentioned how terrified and how exposed she was and how vulnerable she felt. And then afterwards, what she shared with us was how grateful she was for the safety that room, that community really created, that made it feel or protected the conditions that she could share. But that exposure was a result of her lack of experience of people being able to hold that safe container. So the thing here is disclosure with safety. What it does is it creates that intimacy that we all crave. And it's so beautiful and so powerful when that happens. And as it happens, I hope you feel that too. Now let's connect this to our identities, because this is something that, again, you can't disconnect it from the identity. Because the deeper that you go on this ladder, the more someone is not just sharing information about themselves. They're actually like revealing who they are. It's like, here, let me show you this. And they're trying to make sure that share, that's going to be accepted. It's going to be loved. It's going to be celebrated. You don't want to be in rooms where you're tolerated. You want to be in rooms that want to reveal more and more of who you are so that they can love on you, so that they can connect into that and celebrate that. Their hopes, their fears, their shames, their values, their true self, that's what people are revealing to you. And that deserves care. When someone shares from those deeper layers of themselves, they're not just answering a question. They're handing you something deeply tender about them. And that is why emotional intimacy, it requires responsibility. And that's why I kind of put this one after the emotional maturity, because someone who's emotionally immature doesn't understand the depth of that responsibility and how tender that is. So if you want to build emotional intimacy with a little bit more skill, more tact, more finesse, let's start here. So step number 1, let's locate that rung. Ask yourself, are we at the surface? Are we kind of circling around a values-based conversation? Are we talking about our experiences and when this person traveled there and what that did? Or are we talking about the emotions and how they're feeling? Is it instead maybe a core vulnerability? Oh, does this fall in that insecurity category? Oh my goodness, we're talking mortality, existentialism. We're talking about our core true self. This is identity. Is this? Do not ask a level 6 question when the question and the connection itself is only holding a level 2. I, friends, have done that many a times, and I've totally broken emotional intimacy and connection and then bashed my head up against the wall. What did I do wrong? This is it. I didn't have this ladder. I didn't ask these questions. And this is why creating this content is so important and so meaningful, because I never had these skills. I never had the words. I never had the language to chase after and develop the skill that I know we all have. So when we go there, we ask those questions. The step number 2 in this, the simple practical, is to make it reciprocal. Share something that's true inside of you well before you ask someone else to go deeper. This is not as a performance. That is not just to check the box. Like I have some clients kind of going through the SOP, standard operating procedure. Okay, so ask this question. Okay, do that. No, this is an offering. I like to visualize it like all these classic movies where there's 2 different tribes, first world, and they're different cultures meeting. And there's a peace offering before deepening the connection. I'm picturing like a loaf of bread or some indigenous jewelry and just like those beautiful scenes in film. This is an offering. And you might say something along the lines of, hey, I've been thinking about how much consistency really matters to me. What about you? Or, hey, I've noticed learning to trust myself is more slowly than I actually expected and really wanted to have happen. Has this ever been true for you? That feels different than putting someone like on the spot, in the moment, under the spotlight. You've been there. You know what that feels like. So after we do that, step number 3 is watching the body, the body and adjusting. If they expand, stay right there. Don't you move. If they contract, slow it down. And if they totally disconnect, move back up that ladder, okay? This is not about controlling the conversation. This is about caring for the nervous system of the connection itself. So if you want deeper intimacy, do not just ask deeper questions. It's not just the questions that intimacy is built and cultivated and attuned from. Learn to move with your conversational partner, your intimate partner, your friends with more attunement. Depth without pacing can feel invasive, but depth with safety can feel like you are truly being met. And I want you to remember this. Emotional intimacy is not built by rushing to the bottom of that ladder. It is built by learning how instead to move together. Gradually, reciprocally, responsively. Because the deepest connections, my friends, are not created by forcing that vulnerability. They are instead created when 2 people can reveal themselves without losing safety. And if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you want to actually go a little bit further in the specific practical application in your world, join me and other evolvers at EVE Reflections, where we will dig into this together as a community, where you're not alone and where you are working on this with other evolvers. Click the link in the show notes. You'll get access to that. And I'm excited to continue this work together as we evolve together. Take care, everyone. Until next time, keep evolving.